I'm Sayeed Choudhury. I'm the Associate Dean for Research Data Management at Johns Hopkins University. I'm here to talk about some of the work we've been doing with scientific research data and hopefully find some areas of common interest.
Great. And how much of the scientific research data that you guys are managing is audiovisual?
So far, we haven't dealt with a lot of audiovisual content, but some of our colleagues in other libraries have. And so they're starting to ask us about how we're managing, our data archive might manage that kind of content.
So this is something that you know is coming and you're here to find out what might be on the horizon?
I would say it's actually here. We have scientists not only at my institution, but throughout the community basically saying, we are also filmmakers, we're independent filmmakers. What are you going to do for us?
Wow. Wow. And so what are you doing for them on a day-to-day basis? What's your job like these days?
It's challenging. We don't have the kind of, I'd say, maybe influence. I was going to say control, but that's probably too harsh. In terms of how they acquire their data, how they manage them, researchers have a lot of autonomy in terms of how they do this. Sometimes they actually build new instruments, for example. So we're dealing with a certain heterogeneity or a lack of control that I'm not sure is prevalent in other communities. But at least here, if we know you're doing things in a certain way, we might be able to go back to them and say, please use these standards, please use these kinds of technologies and equipment, and make our lives a little easier, I hope.
Can you give us an example of some of the kinds of data that you are working with, that you've had historically, or that you know you'll be continuing to get in the future?
Yeah, so we started working with astronomers about 10, 12 years ago, and that's, as you might imagine, primarily image data, a lot of sort of computer-generated data.
And very high resolution, I would say.
Very high resolution. So the particular project we've been dealing with is called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, and it's about 160 terabytes of data. We have to keep copies for preservation purposes. That's about 10, 15 years ago. Astronomers today are dealing in the petabyte range. But what we are now finding, of course, are things like one of the researchers that I'll talk about is he looks at fish camouflage, and he has to have video, of course.
Wow.
As you would imagine, showing two images, anyone could say, how do I know that fish was there?
Sure.
In the first reel. So we also, at the other end of the spectrum, have a lot of oral history recordings, video and audio, at the university that we need to digitize and get into our data archive in some way.
So you're covering all of the university's research output, all of the research data that could be happening, that could be gathered at a major research university.
That is correct.
Wow.
That is the remit we have. We can stage the work, and we can basically say we're ready to deal with these kinds of data, and we need more time with that, but ultimately we will be required to deal with all of it.
And so why does that fall to your division of the libraries? Why isn't that being handled by the individual groups that are generating this data?
So to some extent it is. So there's typically an active phase of projects where they really need the data close by, and they need to use it at 3 a.m. when they have an inspiration, for example. But once that stage is over, they need to hand it to someone who can take care of it for the long term.
Sure.
And that's where we come in, because the library is an organization that has at least a historical responsibility for preserving content. And we're also objective and neutral in some sense. We aren't going to privilege any particular community. We're going to try and support everybody.
That's great. And so what have you seen so far today that you think is interesting or exciting?
Well, I think it's interesting that there are a lot of concepts that I think where there are common interests, but you use different language, different terminology, different vocabulary, so I think that's something we'd have to learn how to interface in that regard. I think we may have something to offer in terms of sort of what do you do if you have a more chaotic nature, but I also think you have something to offer in terms of how you deal with things at scale in a way that we haven't yet.
And there might be some interesting bridges to be built here. I mean, the guy from the FBI could be talking about facial recognition software, right? Get those fish camouflage pieces match up.
Exactly. So it's all a case of what we think is sort of a common problem you may think is unique and vice versa.
That's
so
great.
Trying to get everyone to understand each other's perspectives is why I'm here.
So part of the reason you're here is to talk about your work, but also to bump up against people who might be doing things that you can learn from or share with.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.